Verdansk is back, and much like a failed situationship, you guys are all crawling on back. Whether you like it or not, it's just simply worth a try. The reality is that Verdansk is probably going to be an interesting refresh of everything we've seen of Warzone so far, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, if I'm gonna, if I'm gonna suffer and crawl on back to the old Call of Duty cow that is the moneymaker, then how have things changed? That's the million-dollar question. Now, for those of you, the sheer idea of the word Omni movement might quite frankly scare you. The idea that you can slide backwards and slide sideways is something that features in Warzone, although they have mildly changed the movement for this update. And if that is an intimidating factor, or you simply don't know what settings have changed, you don't know what the meta is, this video is for you. Everything will be covered in this video, including the meta that we'll be releasing, the new settings that you should be worried about, or returning settings that are worthwhile, as well as the returning features of Warzone that you've come to know and love. So we're going to kick things off with the meta, the weapons that are expected to be really good on day one, and that pretty much includes all of the ones returning to the game, the AMAX, the Kilo, and the HDR, and it doesn't look like the Grau is going to feature in this one because it ends up being a conversion kit. Now, the meta for Warzone in terms of assault rifles is on screen, and I'll do the same for SMGs for you guys to get a feel and a see for how these metas are shaping up, and what weapons you might want to level up or take into the game. But pretty much all of the new guns like the Kilo and the AMAX are looking really solid options, and the HDR, of course, is looking phenomenal. But there are a couple of things in the Black Ops 6 iteration of Warzone that has changed and things that you might want to get to grips with, the first being the attachment system. Now, the attachments in this are a lot more linear in terms of what they do and don't offer, and there are certain attachments, for example, muzzle brakes and compensators, that very specifically set your recoil to work in certain ways. And this extends as well to underbarrels, vertical grips, for example, specifically focus on reducing horizontal recoil and don't do anything else. And the majority of these attachments offer primarily benefits only, with only some attachments offering downsides. So for example, the extended MAD 2 here on the AK, giving you a full 50 rounds, comes at the cost of aim down sight speed and reload quickness. And there are even some mods like recoil springs which universally affect your recoil, and depending on what you're trying to achieve with any weapon, you can press RT, the right trigger, or R2, in order to identify how an attachment is actually affecting your gun. So if you find that a gun has a lot of recoil, you can go for an attachment like the vertical foregrip over here, or the lightweight foregrip, and have a look at like what this does. What does the precision foregrip offer me? How is it going to affect my gun? Is it going to help me in terms of controlling recoil, or am I already in the right spot? And you can do this with every single weapon. You can see here I've got the PPSH, and you can see that I've built the PPSH to work in a certain way, but if I'm not entirely sure about a certain attachment, I can see, okay, maybe I want a little bit more mobility. I can see what different stocks can do for my overall handling, my aim down sight speed, and how much it can ruin my gun as well if it has some trade-offs. So the light stock, for example, offering huge benefits on movement speed. This is a really good way to get to grips with the attachment system. There's no point me going, okay, use this build, use this build, use this build, use this build, because if they change anything, you won't know how to make things the way you want to make them. Or if a new gun comes along, understanding how each attachment works is just a really simple way of going, sweet, this is roughly what I'm looking for, job done. For the most part, on most of the guns, you're going to be looking to eliminate horizontal recoil, so the vertical foregrip is really big for that, and most weapons will offer recoil springs as well for those of you who struggle to aim at certain targets. Next up is settings. Now, fundamentally, there are some key settings in here that you should just absolutely make sure you change, whether you're on PC or console, whether you're controller, keyboard, and mouse, and this will make your game feel better, more fluid, and perhaps even give you some competitive advantages. So we're going to dive on into these. So the first thing we're going to cover are universal settings. Now, some of these are settings that you might have seen before, and some of them might be entirely new to you. All of them are useful things on your return to Verdansk in Warzone. We're going to start off with the graphics tab. Now, I'm on PC, so I have a crap ton of options that you might not have, but the biggest one that applies to absolutely everybody is the view setting. Now, in view, you are able to set a field of view, and if you're returning on console for the first time on PlayStation 5 and Series X, this will be the first time you'll be able to play Verdansk with a field of view that's higher than the default, and that is something that I would highly recommend depending on your distance from your screen. I personally play with 115, but most critically you want it set to affected, with weapon field of view set to wide, and also vehicle field of view set to wide as well. World motion blur and weapon motion blur are two settings that you want to turn off for visual clarity, And you also want first-person camera movement and third-person camera movement set to least. In the display tab, a lot of you will also have the ability, in the quality tab even, to set a certain type of upscaling or sharpening across all platforms, and sharpening your game will make it look visually a little bit better and a little bit more responsive, and I would recommend that everybody does this. For the vast majority of you who are playing on controller or playing on console or whatever you happen to be using, there has been a big shakeup in terms of how weapon sensitivity and how your general sensitivity in-game feels. And these are now different values. It's no longer this sort of 1 to 20 system, it's now a granular 0.10 system that you can see on screen. Now, on screen right now is a chart, so if there's a sensitivity that you're used to, this should be the sensitivity that you're looking for. Right now, I play at a sensitivity of 1.7, which I think is very useful. Now, you can also lower your dead zone over on the right stick and have your left stick dead zone minimized as well. It's really important on the left stick to have the maximum dead zone set lower to something like 65 to really make the most of Omni movement and try and reduce some of those dead slides. So if you want to carbon copy these settings, you can. Just be aware the lower you go with your center in terms of minimum, the more likely you are to introduce stick drift if you have a slightly older or more busted controller. In the aiming tab, there are lots of settings that do carry on over from what you may remember in Verdansk. The biggest ones in this one being the transition, but most importantly, the aim response curve. I have mine set to dynamic, and a new setting that you may not be familiar with from your days in Verdansk is that you can now actually change the aggressiveness of the response curve. I highly recommend dynamic or linear for the vast majority of players, and I set mine to 0.7 to make it a little less aggressive and feel less floaty, and I would recommend giving that a go. Moving on into the movement tab, and this does apply whether you're on keyboard and mouse or on controller, so these settings now are kind of a universal thing between these two. Sprint assist is something you absolutely want to be set to on, and you also want sprint assist delay to 0, as well as sideways and backwards on. You want that set how it is. Mantle assist you probably want turn off entirely. Crouch assist you also want turn off as well, and corner slicing you also want turn off. You're likely going to want tap to slide enabled, which means tapping will slide and then holding will dive, and the delay set to medium, with automatic airborne mantle set to partial. And you should also set slide maintain sprint because that's something everybody wants, and turn off auto parachuting in the game. In the movement advanced settings, you also have these settings too here, which are very useful. Tactical sprint behavior, for example, being set to toggle instead of hold, I think is very useful. Grounded mantle as well is something you can have. Allows you to turn and jump over certain things. Now, for me personally, I think you should have this set to off, because grounded mantle is one of those things that will accidentally jump you over a wall when you don't want to, and it's really, really annoying. Now, heading on back into the combat section, you also have a variety of options in terms of applying armor plates at different variances. So for me personally, I always set it to apply one, and then I hold Y or triangle to apply all of them down at the same time. You also have the ability to prioritize a finishing move or a body shield, which is a new feature in this game, as well as equipment behavior such as hold. In the combat advanced settings setup as well, you can change different zoom activations, and also the interact and reload behavior, which I think is a very important one. I personally prioritize interact, which means I tap to reload, and I hold to tap to interact with something and hold to reload, which I think is a better system than what most of the default options tend to offer you, and this will make you feel more fluid in Warzone, especially when you're looting items. For those of you returning for the first time since Verdansk, there are lots of new settings that are available to you in the gameplay HUD, allowing you to change the shape of the minimap, for example, turn on or off rotation, as well as have the radar backing on or off. You can also change whether you want the horizontal compass or if you want the compass set to be on the minimap. You can turn on or off whether you want the stamina bar, whether you want to see players' full names or not. All of these are available to you. You also have the ability to have the weapon inspect attachment info. But the biggest one for me is down here in crosshair. You can set a static crosshair, which makes the game, in my opinion, a little bit more readable in terms of muscle memory, and you can also have a center dot on, and you can have that at various different sizes and scales. You can also change the color of that central dot and your crosshair to something a little bit brighter that I've done here, and this lets you have a custom crosshair color, which in my view just looks a little bit cleaner, a little bit more readable. You can see, for example, I could set this to bright pink if I wanted to, but I personally go for a bit of a light-ish blue, a more teal color in the grand scheme of things. And then you can even change different widgets. If you don't want to see Elimination IDs, you can turn those off. If you don't want to see medals and notifications, you can turn those off. If you don't want to see things like the elimination feed, you can also turn all of that off. These are all custom settings that are now available in the game that I'd highly recommend making use of, especially changing your minimap to square. And finally, the returning features for Warzone. Now, Warzone has changed a lot. For some of you guys who are coming back for the first time in forever, there are some pretty substantial changes that you should be aware of. 150 players is returning to the game, as well as the return of loot floating rather than being randomly stuck on the floor. The helicopters are going back to how they originally felt in Warzone 1, and the Big Bertha truck is back in the game. Vertical buy station menus make a return, as well as all of the original contracts that you've come to know and love from Warzone 1. Thermite is also back into the game as an optional equipment that you can use, as well as shooting players out of the sky on the infill or when flying in from the Gulag. As is the HDR Unlimited One-Shot. As far as we're aware, the HDR Sniper is the only weapon in the game that has a one-shot down at any range so long as it's a headshot. And all the other classics like the classic victory screen, the classic audio, the classic music, all of that is coming back in this update as well that you should be aware of. Hopefully you found this video useful, folks. If you did, please do drop a like, drop a subscribe, and I'll see you again in the next one.